The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in courtroom 3B of the Maricopa County Family Court building, casting harsh shadows across the worn mahogany benches that had witnessed countless broken families over the decades. Sarah Mitchell's palms were slick with sweat as she adjusted her navy blue blazer for the 5th time in 10 minutes, her eyes darting nervously between the imposing judge's bench and the man she had once loved sitting 30 feet away. Derek looked different, now sharper, somehow more calculating. His expensive charcoal suit probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, and his perfectly styled hair gleamed under the courtroom lights. When had he started caring so much about his appearance? During their marriage, he'd been content with wrinkled shirts and day-old stubble. Now he sat with military precision next to his attorney, Thomas Blackwood, whose reputation for ruthless custody battles preceded him like a storm cloud. "Mommy, why is everyone so quiet?" Emma whispered, her small voice barely audible in the cavernous room. At 3 years old, she was all golden curls and innocent blue eyes, completely unaware that the adults surrounding her were about to decide whether she would continue living with her mother or be handed over to a father she barely knew anymore. Sarah's heart clenched as she looked down at her daughter, whose tiny legs dangled from the adult-sized chair, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. "They're just thinking very hard about grown-up things, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, smoothing Emma's hair with trembling fingers. The courtroom itself seemed designed to intimidate. Dark wood paneling stretched from floor to ceiling, punctuated by stern portraits of former judges whose painted eyes seemed to follow every movement. The American flag stood at attention beside the Arizona state flag, both perfectly pressed and positioned. Behind the plaintiff's section, a handful of court watchers sat in uncomfortable silence, law students, maybe, or reporters hoping for drama in what should have been a private family matter. Judge Patricia Hawkins entered with the authority of someone who had been making life-altering decisions for 25 years. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the thick file that represented the complete dissolution of Sarah and Derek's 7-year marriage. The bailiff's voice boomed through the room. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Hawkins," and the scraping of chairs against the polished floor created an ominous symphony. Court Officer Reynolds took his position near the back entrance, his presence both reassuring and intimidating. A veteran of 15 years in courthouse security, he had seen every kind of family drama imaginable. Today, he wasn't alone. Duke, his German Shepherd partner, lay quietly beside him, the dog's intelligent brown eyes scanning the room with professional alertness. The K-9 unit had been called in because of recent threats made during custody hearings in other cases, but Duke's primary function was narcotics detection, a skill that had made him legendary among Phoenix law enforcement. Sarah's attorney, Jennifer Martinez, shuffled through papers with the exhausted efficiency of someone handling her 4th custody case that week. At 38, Jennifer had built her reputation defending mothers against well-funded ex-husbands, but something about Derek's case troubled her. His demands for full custody seemed excessive, almost desperate, and his financial records showed mysterious income spikes that didn't align with his pharmaceutical sales job. "Your Honor," Thomas Blackwood began, his voice smooth as silk and twice as expensive. "My client, Derek Mitchell, is requesting full custody of the minor child, Emma Mitchell, based on documented evidence of the mother's instability and inability to provide a safe, nurturing environment." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Instability? She had been Emma's primary caregiver since birth, had sacrificed her marketing career to be a full-time mother, had moved heaven and earth to maintain Emma's routine during the traumatic divorce proceedings. Her only crime had been seeking therapy and taking anti-anxiety medication after discovering Derek's increasingly erratic behavior and sudden secretiveness. Emma fidgeted in her chair, her attention span exhausted by the formal atmosphere and incomprehensible adult conversation. She began to hum quietly, a habit that emerged when she felt overwhelmed. The melody was from a children's show about friendly animals, completely at odds with the tension crackling through the air. Derek's transformation over the past year remained a mystery that haunted Sarah's sleepless nights. A man who had once built elaborate blanket forts with Emma and read her bedtime stories in different character voices had gradually become distant, paranoid, and obsessed with work. He had installed new locks on their house, insisted on handling all errands alone, and developed an explosive temper when questioned about his whereabouts. The divorce had been his idea, filed suddenly while Sarah was visiting her sister in California. With Emma, Mrs. Mitchell has been taking prescription medication for anxiety, Blackwood continued, his tone suggesting this was evidence of criminal behavior rather than responsible mental health care. She has attended therapy sessions twice weekly, indicating severe psychological distress that could negatively impact the child's development. Furthermore, she has been unable to maintain steady employment since the separation, raising questions about her ability to provide financial stability. Jennifer Martinez's jaw tightened. Every point Blackwood made was either misleading or completely fabricated, but his delivery was masterful. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as her private struggles were dissected for public consumption. Emma suddenly perked up, her wandering attention caught by something across the room. Her eyes had found Duke, and her face lit up with the pure joy that only children experience when they spot a dog. She pointed with her tiny finger, bouncing slightly in her seat with barely contained excitement. "Look, Mommy," she whispered loudly. "A doggy." Sarah followed Emma's gaze to the German Shepherd, lying calmly beside Officer Reynolds. The sight should have been comforting. Police dogs were heroes, after all, protectors of the innocent. But something in Emma's expression gave her pause. It wasn't just excitement. There was recognition there, as if seeing an old friend after a long absence. Judge Hawkins was reviewing the custody evaluation reports, her experienced eyes catching every nuance of the competing narratives. She had presided over hundreds of these cases, and something about Derek Mitchell's urgency bothered her professional instincts. In her experience, fathers who truly wanted what was best for their children didn't typically demand immediate full custody without regard for the emotional trauma such a sudden change might cause. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, creating patterns of light and shadow across the courtroom floor. Outside, Phoenix was waking up to another scorching desert day, but inside this windowless chamber, time seemed suspended between past mistakes and future consequences. None of the adults in the room could have imagined that within minutes, a 3-year-old's innocent observation would shatter everything they thought they knew about Derek Mitchell and transform a routine custody hearing into the opening chapter of the largest drug bust in Arizona history. Emma continued to stare at Duke with fascination, her small finger still pointing, completely unaware that she was about to become the most unlikely hero in the annals of law enforcement. The moment arrived without warning, like lightning splitting a clear sky. Emma had been quietly observing Duke for several minutes, her 3-year-old mind processing something that none of the adults in the room could comprehend. Her small finger, which had been tracing invisible patterns on the wooden bench, suddenly shot up with the enthusiasm of a child who had just solved the world's greatest puzzle. "Daddy's doggy." The words exploded from Emma's tiny lungs with such unexpected volume and excitement that Judge Hawkins dropped her reading glasses. The sound echoed off the mahogany walls like a gunshot, reverberating through the suddenly frozen courtroom. Every head turned toward the small girl, who was now bouncing in her seat with pure, unbridled joy, her golden curls catching the fluorescent light as she pointed directly at Duke. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that screams louder than any sound, thick, suffocating, and pregnant with possibilities that no one wanted to acknowledge. Sarah's face drained of color so quickly that Jennifer Martinez instinctively reached out to steady her client, fearing she might faint. "Emma, honey, no," Sarah whispered desperately, her voice cracking with mortification. Her hands trembled as she tried to gently lower Emma's pointing finger. That's just a police dog, sweetheart. You've never seen that dog before." But Emma was having none of it. Her 3-year-old logic was crystal clear, and she was absolutely certain about what she knew. She pulled her hand away from her mother's grasp and pointed even more vigorously, her entire body language radiating the confidence that only young children possess when they know they're right about something important. "Is Daddy's doggy?" Emma insisted, her voice rising with the indignation of someone whose truth wasn't being believed. Same smell like Daddy's room." The courtroom's atmosphere shifted like air pressure before a tornado. Thomas Blackwood's expensive pen slipped from his manicured fingers and clattered onto the polished table with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. His client, Derek Mitchell, had gone rigid in his chair, his perfectly styled hair suddenly appearing disheveled despite not moving a muscle. The confident smirk that had played on his lips throughout his attorney's character assassination of Sarah had vanished completely, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like terror. Same smell. Emma continued chanting, clapping her small hands together with delight at her discovery. To her innocent mind, this was wonderful news. She had found something familiar in this scary place full of strangers and serious faces. "Mommy, look! Daddy's doggy came to see us." Judge Hawkins had been presiding over family court for 25 years. She had witnessed every conceivable drama, from bitter custody battles to shocking paternity reveals, but never had she seen a 3-year-old's innocent comment create such an immediate and palpable shift in a courtroom's energy. Her judicial instincts, honed by decades of reading human behavior, were screaming that something significant was happening. Officer Reynolds, positioned near the back of the courtroom, felt Duke's body language change beneath his hand. The German shepherd, who had been lying calmly in professional repose, had lifted his head and was now alert. His ears perked, and his intelligent brown eyes focused on the front of the courtroom with laser intensity. Duke's nostrils flared slightly as he processed sense that his extensive narcotics training had taught him to recognize and respond to. Derek's transformation was visible to anyone watching closely enough. The man who had entered the courtroom, with the confidence of someone certain of victory, was now gripping the edge of the defendant's table so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. A thin sheen of perspiration had appeared on his forehead despite the air conditioning, and his breathing had become noticeably shallow and rapid. "Your Honor," Thomas Blackwood attempted, his usually smooth voice betraying the first hints of uncertainty. "Children often make imaginative connections. My client has never owned a dog, and certainly not a German shepherd. This is clearly just a child's fantasy. And oh," Emma's voice cut through the lawyer's explanation like a sword through silk. She had inherited her mother's stubborn streak and her father's determination, and at this moment, both traits were on full display. "Not imagination. Daddy's doggy. Know the smell." Know it, know it. Sarah felt the world tilting on its axis. Emma had an extraordinary memory for scents. It was something Sarah had always marveled at. Her daughter could identify her grandmother's perfume from 3 rooms away, could tell when they were approaching their favorite ice cream shop from 2 blocks down the street, and could always find Sarah's hiding places for Christmas presents by following her scent trail. But this was impossible. Derek had never owned a dog. He claimed to be allergic, had refused Emma's countless pleas for a puppy, and had never shown any interest in animals whatsoever. Dr. Maria Vasquez, the court-appointed child psychologist, leaned forward in her seat with growing fascination and concern. Her expertise in child development was telling her that Emma's reaction was far too specific and emotionally charged to be dismissed as imagination. Children Emma's age didn't typically fabricate such detailed sensory memories, especially not in high-stress situations like custody hearings, where they usually became withdrawn or confused. Saying smell like daddy's clothes, Emma added helpfully, as if this additional detail would make the adults understand better. Like when daddy comes home from work and smells funny and makes Emma's nose tickle. Judge Hawkins set down her papers. With deliberate care, her experienced eyes moving slowly from Emma's earnest face to Derek's increasingly panicked expression, then to Duke, who was now sitting at attention with the focused intensity that Officer Reynolds recognized as his partner's. Alert posture. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Hawkins said carefully, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just realized she might be witnessing something far more significant than a custody dispute. I think we need to take a brief recess to clarify some things. Derek shot to his feet so quickly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. A child's fantasy cannot be grounds for Daddy's doggy knows Emma. The little girl shouted triumphantly, pointing at Duke, who had now risen to his feet and was looking directly at Derek with the kind of professional interest that made Officer Reynolds' hand instinctively move toward his radio. The courtroom hung suspended in that moment, balanced on the edge of a revelation that would change everything. Emma's innocent words had somehow unlocked a door that Derek Mitchell had spent months carefully keeping sealed, and now, in front of a judge, lawyers, court officers, and his own daughter, that door was beginning to swing wide open. Judge Hawkins looked at the small girl whose pure honesty might have just exposed something that adult investigators had missed entirely, and made a decision that would echo far beyond the walls of courtroom 3B. The 15-minute recess that Judge Hawkins called felt like an eternity compressed into heartbeats. The courtroom emptied in waves of whispered conversations and confused glances, but the hallway outside buzzed with an electricity that hadn't been there an hour earlier. Sarah clutched Emma's hand as they moved toward the water fountain, her mind reeling with possibilities she didn't want to consider. Mommy, why is everyone acting funny? Emma asked, swinging her mother's hand, as if nothing earth-shattering had just occurred. Did I say something wrong about Daddy's doggy? Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level, her navy blazer wrinkling against the cold marble floor. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that her innocent observation might have just turned there? World upside down? No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. You just surprised everyone. Dr. Maria Vasquez approached with the measured steps of someone who had made a career out of reading the subtle signs that children display when they're processing trauma or revealing hidden truths. At 42, she had evaluated hundreds of children in custody cases, but something about Emma's behavior was triggering every professional alarm bell she possessed. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Vasquez said softly, her voice carrying the gentle authority that made children trust her instinctively. May I speak with you privately for a moment? They moved to a quiet alcove near the large windows that overlooked downtown Phoenix. The morning sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps where other families waited their turn to have their lives dissected by the legal system. What Emma just demonstrated, Dr. Vasquez began carefully, is something we call associative scent memory. Children her age have remarkably acute sensory recall, particularly for smells that they encounter regularly in their home environment. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying that when a 3-year-old makes such a specific, emotionally charged connection between a trained narcotics detection dog and her father, we need to take that very seriously. Dr. Vasquez paused, studying Sarah's pale face. Has Emma ever mentioned any unusual smells associated with Derek? Any complaints about headaches, nausea, or respiratory issues when she's been with him? The questions hit Sarah like a physical blow. Suddenly, months of dismissed concerns came flooding back with crystal clarity. Emma's chronic runny nose that Derek always attributed to seasonal allergies. The way Emma would sometimes refuse to go into Derek's home office, claiming it smelled yucky. The mysterious stains on Derek's clothes that he always explained away as pharmaceutical samples. The times Emma would come home from weekend visits with her father, complaining that her throat hurt. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, sinking into one of the hard plastic chairs that lined the hallway. "I thought ... I just thought she had allergies." Derek said it was probably dust or something in the ventilation system. Meanwhile, down the hall, a different kind of conversation was taking place. Officer Reynolds stood near the men's restroom, speaking in low, urgent tones into his radio, while Duke sat alertly beside him. The German shepherd's behavior during the courtroom incident had been unmistakable to his handlers trained. Duke had detected something, and his years of narcotics training didn't allow for false positives. "Dispatch, this is Reynolds. I need Detective Chong from Narcotics Division to respond to the courthouse immediately. We may have a situation developing in family court." Inside the courthouse security office, grainy surveillance footage was being reviewed frame by frame. Derek Mitchell's entrance to the building that morning was captured from multiple angles, and now court security personnel were studying his movements with new interest. His expensive briefcase, his perfectly tailored suit, his confident stride, everything looked different when viewed through the lens of suspicion that a 3-year-old's innocent words had created. Thomas Blackwood found his client in the men's room, splashing cold water on his face with hands that trembled despite Derek's obvious efforts to control them. The high-powered attorney had built his reputation on reading people, and what he was reading from Derek Mitchell right now made his stomach churn with professional dread. "Derek, I need you to tell me right now if there's anything at all that could explain what just happened in there," Blackwood said, his voice stripped of its usual courtroom polish. Derek straightened, water droplets still clinging to his pale face. "It's nothing, Tom. Kids say crazy things all the time. You know that. Emma's just confused, maybe trying to get attention. Sarah probably coached her or something." But even as Derek spoke the words, his eyes betrayed him. Blackwood had been practicing law for 23 years, and he knew the difference between righteous indignation and desperate deflection. This was definitely the latter. "The judge is going to want answers," Blackwood pressed. "And if that K-9 officer decides to investigate further." "There's nothing to investigate," Derek snapped, his voice echoing off the bathroom tiles with more force than necessary. "I sell pharmaceuticals for a living. Maybe the dog smells medical samples on my clothes. That's perfectly legitimate." Back in the hallway, Dr. Vasquez was continuing her gentle interrogation of Sarah, each question peeling back another layer of Derek's carefully constructed facade. "When did Derek's behavior start changing?" the psychologist asked. "Any new work schedules? Unusual friends? Unexplained income?" Sarah's mind was racing through memories she had tried to suppress during the painful divorce proceedings. He started working nights about 8 months ago, said it was a promotion, traveling to different hospitals. But his paychecks, they got much bigger, but never at regular intervals. Sometimes huge amounts, sometimes nothing for weeks. Did he ever bring work materials home? All the time. But he got really protective about his office. Installed a new lock, said the pharmaceutical samples were valuable and needed security. Sarah's voice cracked as the implications became clear. Emma used to love playing in there when she was younger, but lately she's refused to go in. Sighed. It made her nose burn. Judge Hawkins emerged from her chambers, having spent the recess consulting with court administration and reviewing Emma's custody evaluation file with new eyes. The little girl's psychological profile showed a child with exceptionally acute sensory awareness and an unusually detailed memory for environmental factors traits that her evaluator had noted as remarkable but perfectly normal for a gifted 3-year-old. Detective Lisa Chong arrived at the courthouse with the urgency of someone who understood that time was often the enemy in drug investigations. 20 years with the Phoenix Police Narcotics Division had taught her to recognize opportunities when they presented themselves, and a custody hearing that had accidentally stumbled onto a potential drug case was definitely an opportunity worth pursuing immediately. Officer Reynolds met Detective Chong at the security entrance, Duke alert and ready beside them both. "We've got a situation that's either going to be nothing or everything," Reynolds explained quickly. "A 3-year-old just positively identified my narcotics dog as smelling like her father's belongings." Detective Chong's eyebrows raised. In her experience, children were often the most reliable witnesses in drug cases because they reported exactly what they experienced without the filters that adults applied. How reliable is the kid? Reliable enough that the judge called a recess and everyone in that courtroom looks like they've seen a ghost. As the 15-minute break stretched toward 20 minutes, Judge Hawkins made a decision that would ripple far beyond the walls of family court. She instructed her bailiff to extend the recess indefinitely and to ensure that Derek Mitchell remained in the building. What had started as a routine custody hearing was about to become something far more serious, and Patricia Hawkins had no intention of letting a potential criminal walk out of her courtroom simply because his 3-year-old daughter had been too honest for everyone's comfort. The truth, as Emma's innocent observation had revealed, was often hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone pure enough to speak it without fear of consequences. Detective Lisa Chong moved through the courthouse corridors with the predatory grace of someone who had spent 2 decades hunting drug dealers through the labyrinthine streets of Phoenix. Her worn leather jacket and practical boots were a stark contrast to the polished suits surrounding her, but her presence commanded immediate respect from everyone she passed. At 45, she had built her reputation on following leads that other investigators dismissed as coincidental, and a 3-year-old's innocent observation was exactly the kind of unconventional break that had made her legendary in narcotics circles. "Officer Reynolds," she said, approaching the canine handler with businesslike efficiency, "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened in that courtroom." Reynolds straightened, his hand automatically moving to rest on Duke's head. The child pointed at my partner and identified him as Daddy's doggy. She kept insisting they had the same smell. Duke's been showing increased alertness ever since classic detection behavior. Detective Chong knelt down to Duke's level, studying the German Shepherd's intelligent brown eyes. She had worked with dozens of narcotics dogs over the years, and she recognized the subtle signs of a canine who had detected something significant. Duke's ears were pricked forward, his nostrils still occasionally flaring, as he processed scents that his extensive training had taught him to identify. "And Tasha, report. Has he given you a positive alert signal yet?" Chong asked. "Not officially, but his body language is screaming that he's picked up something familiar." "I've been his handler for 4 years. I know when Duke's working." Judge Hawkins appeared in the hallway, her judicial robes rustling as she approached the growing cluster of law enforcement personnel. Her 25 years on the bench had taught her to recognize when a situation was spiraling beyond the normal boundaries of family court, and she was prepared to do whatever was necessary to get to the truth. "Detective Chong," the judge said with formal courtesy that barely masked her urgency, "I understand you specialize in narcotics investigations. What's your professional assessment of what we witnessed?" Chong stood, brushing dust from her knees. Children don't lie about sensory experiences. Your Honor, if that little girl recognizes your canine scent profile and associates it with her father, there's a scientific reason. Dogs like Duke are trained to detect specific chemical signatures: cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, methamphetamine. If she's making that connection, it's because she's been exposed to those same substances. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one wanted to acknowledge. Sarah, who had been listening from nearby, felt her knees buckle. Jennifer Martinez, her attorney, quickly moved to support her client as the full weight of the situation became clear. "Detective," Judge Hawkins continued, "what would you need to confirm or rule out these suspicions?" "I need to conduct a controlled scent test with Duke and some of Mr. Mitchell's personal belongings. If there's a positive hit, we'll have probable cause for further investigation." Thomas Blackwood appeared at the end of the hallway, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor with increasing urgency. His client was nowhere to be seen, and the attorney's usually perfect composure was showing cracks that everyone present could observe. "Your Honor," Blackwood called out, slightly breathless, "my client is requesting permission to leave the building. He has an important business meeting this afternoon and feels that this delay is unnecessary harassment based on a child's imagination." Detective Chong and Officer Reynolds exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their professional experience with suspects who suddenly needed to be somewhere else. Judge Hawkins's expression hardened with the authority of someone who had just realized she might be dealing with more than a custody dispute. "Mr. Blackwood, your client will remain in this building until I determine whether these proceedings need to continue." "That's not a request, it's a court order." Meanwhile, in a small conference room down the hall, Dr. Vasquez was conducting an impromptu evaluation session with Emma, using techniques designed to help children express what they had experienced, without leading or influencing their responses. Emma sat in a child-sized chair, coloring in a book while answering questions in her matter-of-fact 3-year-old way. "Emma, sweetie, can you tell me more about Daddy's doggy?" Dr. Vasquez asked, gently. "He's a good doggy," Emma replied, not looking up from her careful coloring of a butterfly. "But he smells like Daddy's room when Daddy has his meetings with the scary men." Dr. Vasquez felt her pulse quicken. "Scary men? Can you tell me about them?" "They come at night sometimes. They talk loud and make Mommy cry. They smell like Daddy's room too, like medicine, but yucky medicine that makes Emma's nose hurt." Every word from Emma's innocent lips was building a picture that made Dr. Vasquez's professional training scream warnings. Children Emma's age didn't fabricate complex scenarios involving multiple people, specific scents, and detailed behavioral observations. They reported exactly what they experienced, filtered through their limited vocabulary, but remarkably accurate in their sensory details. Back in the main hallway, Detective Chong was preparing for the test that would either vindicate Derek Mitchell or destroy his carefully constructed life. Officer Reynolds had retrieved Derek's briefcase from the security screening area, and Duke was positioned for a formal narcotics detection exercise. "This needs to be done by the book," Chong explained to Judge Hawkins. "If Duke alerts, we'll have probable cause. If he doesn't, Mr. Mitchell is free to go, and this becomes a very embarrassing misunderstanding." Sarah watched from 20 feet away, holding her breath as Duke approached Derek's expensive leather briefcase. The German Shepherd's movements were deliberate and professional, his training evident in every careful step. He circled the briefcase once, then twice, his nostrils working overtime as he processed the chemical information that humans couldn't detect. Then it happened. Duke sat immediately beside the briefcase, lifted his right paw, and looked directly at Officer Reynolds with the unmistakable expression of a working dog who had just found exactly what he was trained to find. The positive alert was crystal clear, textbook perfect, and absolutely damning. "Sweet Jesus," Detective Chong whispered, her 20 years of experience telling her that they had just stumbled onto something much larger than a simple custody case gone wrong. Judge Hawkins closed her eyes briefly, realizing that the family court hearing she had expected to complete by lunch had just become the opening salvo in what might be a major criminal investigation. When she opened her eyes again, her expression was grim with the weight of judicial responsibility. "Officer Reynolds, I want that briefcase secured as evidence immediately." "Detective Chong, what do you need to proceed with a full investigation?" "I need a search warrant for Mr. Mitchell's residence, vehicle, and workplace. And I need to know exactly where Derek Mitchell is right now, because if Duke's right about what he's detecting, we might be looking at a flight risk." Thomas Blackwood's face had gone ashen as he overheard the conversation. In 30 seconds, his high-profile custody case had transformed into a potential felony drug prosecution, and his client had just become the primary suspect in what Detective Chong was already recognizing as a significant narcotics investigation. Emma's innocent observation about Daddy's doggy had just torn away the veil that Derek Mitchell had been hiding behind for months, exposing a reality that none of them had been prepared to confront. The truth, as it often did, had come from the most unexpected source, a 3-year-old girl who simply told adults what she could smell. The Phoenix Police Department's Narcotics Division erupted into controlled chaos within 30 minutes of Detective Chung's urgent call from the courthouse. Computer screens flickered to life as analysts began cross-referencing Derek Mitchell's name against databases that most citizens never knew existed. What they discovered in those first frantic searches would prove that Emma's innocent observation had inadvertently cracked open one of the Southwest's most sophisticated prescription drug trafficking operations. "Jesus Christ," Detective Chung muttered, staring at her computer screen in the courthouse security office. Derek Mitchell's name appeared in no fewer than 17 DEA surveillance reports dating back 8 months. He wasn't just a small-time dealer, he was a key player in an interstate network that the federal authorities had been desperately trying to penetrate. Special Agent Marcus Torres of the D Phoenix Field Division answered Chung's call on the first ring. His voice carried the weary authority of someone who had been hunting this particular network for months without success. "Chung, please tell me you've got something solid. We've been chasing shadows on this pharmaceutical theft ring for almost a year." "I've got better than solid," Chung replied, watching through the security office window as Derek paced frantically in the courthouse lobby while his lawyer made increasingly desperate phone calls. "I've got a K-9 positive alert and a 3-year-old witness who's been living with evidence for months without anyone realizing it." Within an hour, the courthouse conference room had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Federal agents, local detectives, and court personnel crowded around tables covered with surveillance photos, financial records, and pharmaceutical company shipping manifests that painted a picture of criminal enterprise that stretched from Phoenix to Las Vegas to Denver. Agent Torres spread out a series of photographs showing Derek at various hospital loading docks across Arizona. "We've been tracking unusual patterns in prescription drug thefts: OxyContin, fentanyl, morphine, all high-value pharmaceuticals disappearing from hospital inventories. The thefts were sophisticated, inside jobs that required someone with legitimate access and detailed knowledge of security protocols." Detective Chong studied the photos with growing amazement. His pharmaceutical sales job wasn't just cover, it was the perfect infiltration tool. He had legitimate reasons to be in every hospital, medical center, and clinic in the state. Dr. Vasquez joined the briefing, carrying a file that would make everyone in the room reconsider what they thought they knew about child testimony. "I've completed my preliminary evaluation of Emma Mitchell. That little girl has been exposed to significant levels of drug residue for months. Her symptoms: chronic respiratory issues, headaches, nausea, they're all consistent with environmental exposure to processed opioids. Sarah Mitchell sat in a plastic chair against the conference room wall, her face pale with shock as the full scope of her ex-husband's criminal life unfolded before her. Jennifer Martinez, her attorney, had abandoned all pretense of family law and was frantically taking notes that might be needed for criminal proceedings. "My daughter," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "My baby was living in a house contaminated with ... with poison?" Agent Torres turned to face Sarah with the compassionate professionalism that came from years of dealing with families destroyed by drug crimes. "Mrs. Mitchell, based on what we're learning, your ex-husband has been using your family home as a storage and distribution point for stolen pharmaceuticals. Emma's exposure was accidental, but it was also prolonged and potentially dangerous." The investigation revealed Derek's operation with stunning clarity. His legitimate pharmaceutical sales territory gave him access to dozens of medical facilities across 3 states. He had been systematically identifying security weaknesses, recruiting inside accomplices, and coordinating thefts that netted millions of dollars worth of prescription drugs over 18 months. The beauty of his scheme, Agent Torres explained, was that he never stole from the same location twice in quick succession. He rotated through his territory, making the thefts look random instead of coordinated. Hospital administrators assumed they were dealing with separate incidents involving different thieves. Financial analyst Maria Santos had been working through Derek's banking records with the focused intensity of someone following a money trail. The income patterns matched the theft timeline perfectly. Large cash deposits every 2 to 3 weeks, always under the federal reporting threshold. But when you add them up over 18 months, we're looking at over $2 million in unexplained income. The most shocking revelation came when Agent Torres displayed a map showing the distribution network that Derek had helped establish. Red pins marked cities across Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado where stolen pharmaceuticals were being sold through a network of corrupt doctors, illegal pill mills, and street dealers. Derek Mitchell wasn't just a thief, Torres continued grimly. He was the logistical backbone of an operation that was flooding the Southwest with illegal prescription drugs. Every OxyContin pill he stole potentially killed someone through overdose or addiction. Dr. Vasquez had continued her evaluation of Emma throughout the federal briefing, and her findings added another layer of evidence to the criminal case being built against Derek. Emma's scent memory is remarkably detailed. She can distinguish between different types of pharmaceutical odors, which suggests prolonged exposure to multiple drug types. She's also described scary men who visited the house at night, likely Derek's criminal associates coming to collect or distribute stolen medications. The timeline that emerged was chilling in its calculated nature. Derek had begun his criminal activities shortly after Emma's 2nd birthday, turning their family home into a criminal enterprise, while Sarah remained completely unaware. The garage had been converted into a temporary storage facility. The basement had been used for repackaging stolen medications, and Derek's home office had served as the operational headquarters for coordinating thefts across 3 states. The custody battle, Detective Chong realized aloud. It wasn't about wanting his daughter. It was about getting Sarah out of the house and gaining complete control of his storage and distribution operation. Agent Torres nodded grimly. Derek Mitchell was planning to relocate to Nevada with Emma as cover for his criminal activities. Nevada was the next phase of expansion for their network. A single father with a young child makes perfect camouflage for a drug dealer. No one suspects the devoted daddy at school pickup of running a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical theft operation. The evidence continued mounting as investigators worked through Derek's digital footprint. Encrypted messaging apps revealed communications with criminal associates across the Southwest. Surveillance footage from hospital parking lots showed Derek meeting with unknown individuals who were now identified as other members of the theft network. Financial records revealed a sophisticated money laundering operation involving multiple shell companies and offshore accounts. Emma Mitchell, Agent Torres said, looking toward the child psychology evaluation room, where the little girl was still coloring pictures while agents protected her from the chaos her innocent words had unleashed, just helped us solve the largest prescription drug theft case in Arizona history. And she did it by recognizing the smell of her father's criminal activities on a police dog. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. Derek Mitchell had spent 18 months building one of the most sophisticated pharmaceutical theft operations the D had ever encountered, covering his tracks with military precision and staying one step ahead of federal investigators. But he had been undone by a 3-year-old daughter who simply told the truth about what she could smell, turning a routine custody hearing into the break that law enforcement had been desperately seeking. As the afternoon wore on and Derek remained trapped in the courthouse while agents secured search warrants for his properties, Sarah Mitchell began to understand that Emma's innocent observation had not only saved their lives, but potentially saved countless others from the deadly pharmaceuticals her ex-husband had been spreading across the American Southwest. The abandoned warehouse in Tempe sat like a concrete monument to Phoenix's industrial past, its corrugated metal walls hiding secrets that would soon explode into the daylight of federal justice. At 3:47 a.m. on a moonless Tuesday morning, exactly 72 hours after Emma Mitchell had innocently pointed at a police dog in family court, Special Agent Marcus Torres crouched behind a shipping container with 53 other federal and local law enforcement officers preparing to spring the most significant drug bust in Arizona history. Derek Mitchell had no idea that his entire world was about to collapse around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. From his perspective, he was simply conducting another routine business transaction, the kind that had made him rich over the past 18 months, while his ex-wife struggled to pay rent on her small apartment. The irony that his own daughter had provided the thread that would unravel his criminal empire was lost on him as he drove his black BMW through the empty streets toward what he believed was a $3.2 million payday. Agent Torres spoke quietly into his radio headset, his voice barely audible over the desert wind that whistled through the warehouse district. All units, target vehicle is approaching from the north entrance. Remember, we need Mitchell and his associates alive. They're our best chance of mapping the entire network from California to Colorado. Inside a climate-controlled surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, Detective Chong monitored multiple video feeds, while FBI technical specialists recorded every word spoken through sophisticated listening devices that had been planted throughout the warehouse over the past 2 days. The operation had required coordination between 6 different law enforcement agencies, all working together because a 3-year-old girl had recognized a familiar smell. Movement on the south entrance, came the crackling voice of Agent Jessica Reed, positioned on the warehouse roof with night vision equipment. 3 vehicles, looks like the Los Angeles connection, arriving as scheduled. Derek's criminal associates were walking into a trap that had been 18 months in the making, though they would never know that their downfall had been triggered by Toddler testimony in a custody hearing. Vincent Vinny Castellano, the operation's West Coast distributor, stepped out of a silver Mercedes van with the confidence of someone who had never been caught despite moving millions of dollars worth of stolen pharmaceuticals across state lines. The warehouse had been chosen by Derek's network because it appeared perfect for their needs, isolated, easily accessible from 3 highways, with multiple exit routes in case of trouble. What they didn't know was that federal agents had been monitoring their communications for weeks, waiting for exactly this kind of major transaction that would allow them to arrest the entire leadership structure in one coordinated strike. Phoenix. Units, Confirmed visual on Mitchell, Torres whispered into his radio. Through high-powered binoculars, he watched Derek emerge from his BMW, carrying 2 aluminum briefcases that surveillance teams knew contained payment for the largest shipment of stolen fentanyl to move through Arizona in over a year. Sarah Mitchell sat in a secure D-safe house 15 miles away, holding Emma while they both watched cartoons on television. Emma had no idea that her innocent observation 3 days earlier had set in motion the law enforcement operation now unfolding in real time. She was simply happy to be having what she thought was an extended sleepover with the nice police lady, who had given her unlimited access to juice boxes and animal crackers. "Mommy, when can we go home?" Emma asked, not looking up from her coloring book where she was carefully staying inside the lines of a picture showing a police dog that reminded her of Duke. "Soon, sweetheart," Sarah replied, though she knew their old life was gone forever. The house where Emma had unknowingly been exposed to dangerous drugs was now a crime scene, sealed with federal tape while hazmat teams worked to decontaminate every surface that might have been touched by Derek's stolen pharmaceuticals. Back at the warehouse, the trap was closing with military precision. Derek had entered the building carrying his briefcases, followed by 6 associates whose faces had been appearing in surveillance photos for months. The warehouse contained $4.7 million worth of stolen prescription drugs, carefully organized in shipping containers that were destined for illegal distribution points across the Southwest. "All units, hold positions," Agent Torres commanded, watching through infrared cameras as Derek's meeting began inside the warehouse. Federal prosecutors had insisted that they needed recorded evidence of the actual drug transaction, not just possession, but active distribution, to ensure that the criminal charges would result in maximum sentences for everyone involved. The conversation inside the warehouse was being recorded in crystal clear digital audio that would later be played in federal courtroom proceedings. Derek's voice, confident and businesslike, could be heard negotiating prices and delivery schedules for enough illegal pharmaceuticals to supply dozens of pill mills across 3 states. "The fentanyl shipment from Denver is premium quality," Derek was explaining to his associates. "Street value exceeds $3 million, and we've got distribution lined up through Vegas and Phoenix networks. This is the biggest single transaction we've ever coordinated." Agent Torres felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came just before a major bust. In 30 seconds, Derek Mitchell would discover that his pharmaceutical theft empire had been built on foundations of sand, and that the daughter he had been planning to use as cover for his criminal activities had actually provided law enforcement with every piece of evidence they needed to destroy his organization. Green light, all units move now," Torres shouted into his radio. The warehouse exploded into chaos as federal agents stormed through every entrance simultaneously. Floodlights illuminated the interior like daylight, while loudspeakers boomed, "Federal agents, nobody move. Hands where we can see them." Derek Mitchell froze in place, his briefcases falling from suddenly nerveless fingers as he realized that his carefully constructed criminal life was ending in handcuffs and Miranda warnings. Around him, associates who had believed themselves untouchable were dropping to the concrete floor with their hands behind their heads, surrounded by agents wearing tactical gear and carrying automatic weapons. "Derek Mitchell," Agent Torres announced, approaching with handcuffs. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, interstate trafficking of stolen pharmaceuticals, and endangering the welfare of a minor. You have the right to remain silent." The words echoed through the warehouse as Derek was processed for federal custody, still unable to comprehend how his empire had collapsed so completely. He would learn later, during questioning, that his downfall had begun when his 3-year-old daughter had simply told the truth about recognizing a familiar smell. Emma's innocent honesty had accomplished what months of federal investigation had failed to achieve, turning a family court hearing into the break that law enforcement had been desperately seeking. As Derek was loaded into a federal transport vehicle, Agent Torres radioed the safe house where Sarah and Emma waited. "Package delivered," he said simply. "The little witness can go home now to a home that's finally safe." 2 weeks after the warehouse raid that dismantled Arizona's largest prescription drug trafficking network, Courtroom 3B looked remarkably different from the scene where Emma Mitchell had innocently pointed at a police dog and changed the course of federal law enforcement history. Media crews lined the hallway outside, their cameras capturing every moment of what legal experts were already calling the most extraordinary child witness case in Arizona judicial history. Judge Patricia Hawkins entered her courtroom with the measured dignity of someone who understood that her next decisions would be quoted in law textbooks for decades to come. The custody hearing that had begun as a routine family law matter had evolved into a federal criminal case that made national headlines, with a 3-year-old girl at the center of both proceedings. Emma sat in the front row between Sarah and Dr. Maria Vasquez, wearing a bright yellow dress that Sarah had bought for the occasion. The little girl had no understanding of the media attention or the historical significance of her innocent observation. But she was excited because she had been promised that Officer Reynolds and Duke would be there to receive special awards from the judge. Derek Mitchell was conspicuously absent from the courtroom where his custody dreams had died. He sat in a federal detention facility 30 miles away, denied bail after prosecutors argued successfully that he posed an extreme flight risk given his extensive criminal network and offshore financial accounts. His expensive attorney, Thomas Blackwood, had withdrawn from the case after learning the full extent of his client's criminal activities, leaving Derek with a court-appointed public defender who specialized in federal drug crimes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Hawkins began, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, enhanced by 2 weeks of extraordinary revelations. "We gather today to resolve custody matters in the case of Mitchell v. Mitchell, though I suspect future legal scholars will remember these proceedings for reasons none of us anticipated when we first convened." The courtroom gallery was filled with an unusual mixture of family court observers, federal agents, journalists, and legal professionals who had come to witness the conclusion of a case that had transformed from domestic relations into criminal justice history. Agent Torres sat in the second row, having postponed his vacation to witness the resolution of the case that his 3-year-old witness had helped him solve. First, Judge Hawkins continued, "I want to address the custody matter. That brought us here originally. In light of Derek Mitchell's federal indictment on charges of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, interstate trafficking of stolen pharmaceuticals, money laundering, and child endangerment, I hereby award sole physical and legal custody of Emma Mitchell to her mother, Sarah Mitchell, with no visitation rights for the father pending resolution of his criminal charges." Sarah closed her eyes and felt 18 months of fear and uncertainty drain from her shoulders. Emma, sitting beside her, was more interested in the coloring book that Dr. Vasquez had provided, completely unaware that her future had just been secured by judicial decree. "However," Judge Hawkins said, her tone shifting to reflect the extraordinary nature of the proceedings, "the real significance of these hearings extends far beyond family law. What we witnessed in this courtroom 2 weeks ago represents a profound example of how truth emerges from the most unexpected sources." Dr. Vasquez had prepared a comprehensive report on Emma's testimony that would become required reading in child psychology graduate programs. Her evaluation demonstrated conclusively that Emma's scent recognition was scientifically valid. Her behavioral observations were remarkably accurate, and her innocent honesty had provided law enforcement with evidence that months of sophisticated investigation had failed to uncover. "Emma Mitchell," Judge Hawkins said, looking directly at the little girl who had started coloring a picture of a butterfly. "Your truthful observation about recognizing familiar scents has helped law enforcement officials remove dangerous drugs from our community and protect countless families from harm. While you're too young to understand the full significance of what you've accomplished, I want you to know that you've made our entire community safer." Emma looked up from her coloring book and smiled shyly at the judge, then returned to her artwork with the focused concentration that only 3-year-olds could maintain. The courtroom erupted in gentle applause that made Emma giggle and hide behind her coloring book. Officer Reynolds stepped forward with Duke at his side, both of them wearing ceremonial ribbons that recognized their role in what the D was calling Operation Innocent Truth. Duke's tail wagged slightly as he recognized Emma, remembering the little girl whose pointing finger had started the investigation that led to his biggest narcotics bust in 4 years of service. "Officer Reynolds and his K-9 partner Duke," Judge Hawkins announced, "are hereby commended for their professional excellence in recognizing and responding to unusual circumstances that led to the largest drug trafficking arrest in Arizona history. Their partnership represents the finest traditions of law enforcement service." Agent Torres was also recognized for his rapid response and coordination of the multi-agency investigation that had transformed Emma's innocent observation into actionable intelligence. His 20-year career in narcotics enforcement had never included a case that began with child testimony in family court. But his ability to recognize the significance of Emma's words had been crucial to the operation's success. The most emotional moment came when Judge Hawkins addressed the broader implications of the case. Emma Mitchell's experience reminds us that children are often the most reliable witnesses to adult wrongdoing because they report exactly what they observe, without the filters that adults apply. Her courage in speaking truthfully, even when adults might not have believed her, exemplifies the kind of honesty that our judicial system depends upon. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she realized that Emma's ordeal had been transformed into something positive and meaningful. The little girl who had been unknowingly exposed to dangerous drugs had become a symbol of childhood resilience and the power of simple truth-telling. Federal prosecutors announced that Derek's cooperation with ongoing investigations had led to arrests in 6 states and the seizure of over $15 million worth of stolen pharmaceuticals. His criminal network, built over 18 months of careful planning and execution, had been completely dismantled because his 3-year-old daughter had recognized a familiar smell on a police dog. This case will be studied in law schools and police academies for years to come. Judge Hawkins concluded, not just for its unusual circumstances, but for what it teaches us about the importance of listening to children, trusting professional instincts, and recognizing that justice often emerges from the most unexpected sources. As the formal proceedings concluded, Emma ran to Officer Reynolds and Duke, excited to pet the dog who had inadvertently helped her family find safety. Duke accepted her attention with the patient dignity of a working animal who understood that he had played a role in something important, even if the details remained beyond canine comprehension. The custody battle was over. The criminal case was proceeding toward certain conviction, and Emma Mitchell could finally go home to a life free from the toxic environment that her father's crimes had created. Her innocent honesty had not only saved her own family, but protected countless others from the deadly pharmaceuticals that Derek's network had been spreading across the American Southwest. Justice, as Judge Hawkins observed in her closing remarks, had truly emerged from the mouth of a babe. 18 months after a 3-year-old's innocent observation had brought down Arizona's largest prescription drug trafficking network, Emma Mitchell celebrated her 5th birthday in the sun-drenched backyard of their new home in Tucson, surrounded by friends who knew her as the bravest little girl in their kindergarten class. The modest adobe house with its desert garden was a far cry from the contaminated suburban mansion, where she had unknowingly lived among stolen pharmaceuticals. But it was filled with something that had been missing from her early childhood: genuine safety and peace. "Make-a-wish, superhero," called out Tommy Rodriguez, Emma's best friend from school, as she leaned over a birthday cake decorated with police dogs and butterflies, two of her favorite things that had somehow become forever intertwined in her young life story. Emma closed her eyes tightly, her long lashes casting shadows on her cheeks as she made the same wish she had been making for months: that all the scary people would stay far away from families like hers. Sarah Mitchell watched from the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that bore the logo of the Phoenix Children's Advocacy Foundation, the organization she had established 6 months earlier with victim compensation funds and donations that had poured in from across the country after Emma's story became national news. The foundation provided support, counseling, and legal assistance to families whose children had been exposed to drug-related trauma, turning their personal nightmare into hope for others facing similar circumstances. "Mrs. Mitchell," said Detective Lisa Chong, who had become something of a family friend since the dramatic courthouse revelation, "I wanted to give you the final update on Derek's case before the celebration gets too loud." Chong had driven down from Phoenix specifically for Emma's birthday party, bringing news that would officially close the most extraordinary chapter in her 20-year law enforcement career. Derek Mitchell had pleaded guilty to all federal charges 3 weeks earlier, accepting a 25-year prison sentence without possibility of parole in exchange for continued cooperation with ongoing investigations that had expanded to include criminal networks in 12 states. His testimony had led to the conviction of 43 co-conspirators and the recovery of over $30 million worth of stolen pharmaceuticals that would never reach the streets where they could destroy more families. He won't be eligible for supervised release until Emma is 28 years old, Detective Chong explained quietly, ensuring that Emma couldn't overhear the conversation from where she was playing with her friends. The judge made it very clear that Derek's exploitation of his own child as cover for criminal activities represented the most serious kind of betrayal. Emma had grown into a remarkably resilient kindergartner who loved reading, painting, and showing visitors the special certificate she had received from the governor of Arizona, recognizing her as an outstanding young citizen. She still occasionally pointed out police dogs during their trips around Tucson, but now she understood the difference between helper dogs and the bad-smell dogs from her father's old house. Dr. Maria Vasquez had continued working with Emma throughout the transition to their new life, documenting her recovery from environmental drug exposure and her psychological adjustment to normal childhood routines. Her case study, published in the Journal of Child Psychology and featured in pediatric medical conferences nationwide, demonstrated that children could recover completely from toxic environmental exposure when removed quickly and provided with appropriate support. Emma's cognitive development has not only returned to normal ranges, Dr. Vasquez had written in her final report, but she demonstrates exceptional emotional intelligence and empathy, possibly developed through her experience of helping others, without fully understanding the danger she had faced herself. The birthday party represented a celebration that would have been impossible 18 months earlier. Emma's friends included children from families that Sarah's foundation had helped, kids whose parents had struggled with prescription drug addiction, families who had been victimized by illegal pill mills, and children who had been removed from homes where drug manufacturing had put their health at risk. Officer Reynolds arrived during the party with a special guest who made Emma shriek with delight. Duke bounded into the backyard, wearing a festive birthday bandana, his tail wagging as he recognized the little girl whose innocent honesty had made him the most famous narcotics detection dog in the Southwest. The German Shepherd had been featured in law enforcement training videos and had received commendations from agencies across the country. But Emma remained his favorite person to visit. "Duke remembers you, Emma," Officer Reynolds said, watching as the birthday girl threw her arms around the patient dog who had inadvertently saved her life. He still tells other police dogs about the brave little girl who helped catch the bad people. Agent Torres had flown in from Denver, where he was now heading a multi-state task force that used lessons learned from Emma's case to identify other children who might be living in environments contaminated by drug trafficking. His presentation about Operation Innocent Truth had become required training for D agents nationwide, emphasizing the importance of taking child observation seriously in drug investigations. "Emma," Agent Torres said, kneeling down to the birthday girl's level, "I wanted to thank you again for being so honest about what you could smell that day in court. Because you told the truth, lots of other kids are safe now too." Emma nodded solemnly, her 5-year-old understanding of the situation more sophisticated than most adults realized. "Bad people shouldn't make kids sick," she said matter-of-factly, and brightened immediately. "Want some birthday cake? Mommy made it special." Sarah had indeed made the cake special, decorating it with edible flowers that she and Emma had grown in their own garden, a symbol of the new life they had built together from the ashes of Derek's betrayal. Every ingredient had been carefully chosen and prepared in their own kitchen, a stark contrast to the contaminated environment where Emma had spent her earliest years. As the afternoon sun painted the desert landscape in shades of gold and amber, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment of genuine happiness. Emma's innocent observation about recognizing a familiar smell had not only saved their lives but had created ripple effects of justice and healing that continued spreading across the country. The Phoenix Children's Advocacy Foundation had already helped over 200 families, providing everything from legal assistance to medical treatment to housing for children who had been exposed to drug-related trauma. Sarah's speaking engagements at conferences and law enforcement agencies had educated thousands of professionals about recognizing signs of child exposure to criminal activity. "Mommy," Emma said, running to Sarah with chocolate frosting on her cheek and pure joy in her bright eyes. "This is the best birthday ever. And Duke says happy birthday too." Looking at her daughter healthy, happy, and surrounded by people who loved and protected her, Sarah knew that Emma's innocent honesty had not only exposed a criminal conspiracy, but had created something beautiful and lasting. The little girl who had simply pointed at a dog and told the truth about what she could smell had become a symbol of childhood resilience, the power of honest testimony, and the unexpected ways that justice could emerge from the most innocent sources. As the celebration continued into the evening, with Emma playing games with friends who would never know the full extent of what she had survived and overcome, Sarah smiled at the profound truth that her daughter had taught everyone. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon against darkness is simply a child brave enough to speak honestly about what they observe in the world around them.